What's your advice for someone in their 50s or 60s trying out dating apps for the first time?
If you can't go on a date without talking about your ex, you're not ready yet. There's no perfect time to start dating. People will be like, summer better? Is winter better? We are not in the 1950s. Men find self-confidence sexy, and that you're reaching out to them first and you reach out with a unique message. Rejection is tough. And with online dating, for every 5 messages you send, only one person is going to respond back to you. Number one thing that matters is...
Hello and welcome to another episode of Your Retirement Plan Simplified. I'm your host, Joe Curry. And our guest today is Andrea McGinty, a true pioneer in modern dating. She's founded It's Just Lunch, a matchmaking service she built into a national brand before launching 33,000dates.com, where she helps singles in their 30s to 60s navigate online dating with confidence. She's been featured on Oprah, Forbes, The Wall Street Journal, People Magazine, and more. And she's here to share her insights on finding love later in life. So why are we talking about dating for retirees? Well, retirement is a time of new beginnings, and for many that includes finding companionship. But dating after 50 or any major life transition like divorce or losing a spouse can feel overwhelming. So Andrea is here to simplify that process, just like we try to simplify retirement planning. So Andrea, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Joe. It's nice to be here. Yeah, now I tend to focus on people in the 45 to 69-year-old age range. When I first started my career, like in my early 20s, the whole catalyst for starting was I was getting married. I was living in Chicago, and my fiance called off the wedding 2 days before, and suddenly single. And I never, ever thought I'd go down this path, but after some bad dates and crying and, getting over the whole thing, I thought to myself, and here I am with, an accounting and finance degree, which I've never used, by the way. I was always good at fixing people up. And it started in college with like 2 of my college roommates that are still married. So anyway, what happened right after I got dumped at the altar was an executive recruiter called me, some professional opportunities. And I was thinking to myself, gee, I wish this lady was calling me about, like, hey, Andrea, I've got 3 men for you, instead of, hey, I've got 2 jobs for you that you might be really interested in. And so I started thinking about, remember, this is 1990. There's like no Google, there's no online dating, there's nothing. And, you're tired of the bar scene, and the biggest pool you're ever going to meet is college or grad school or, your first couple of years in the workplace. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if there was somebody who could do for people what an executive recruiter does and come up with people, for them to meet outside of, their close-knit group of friends. And that's how I started It's Just Lunch. It took off, and 20 years later, 2010, we had 110 locations. Canada was one of our markets too. And so that's how I got into this whole wonderful, business. And I just think my job's a blast. I mean, I've had over 10,000 marriages, and I get to meet people from all different walks of life. It's not like, I'm a lawyer working with lawyers all day or doctor seeing patients all day. It's really interesting.
Yeah, that is very cool. So how have things, you talked a little bit about kind of the growth, but how has this, I don't know if we call it industry, I guess industry that you're in, how's it evolved over time? So you've been doing it for a while. Obviously, online dating would be kind of the thing now. So how has that journey evolved over time?
Right. So online dating, really came online in the late 90s and the early 2000s. And right now, between the US and Canada, there's 1,400 dating apps out there. So there's a lot. There's a lot of stuff out there. And when I first started and they started coming online, they're a mess. They're a chaotic mess. The people who are running them have no idea what they're doing. The people who are going on there have no idea what they're doing. It's the era of scammers, right? It's the era of people, lying about their age and their looks and their, everything. So it was sort of a mess. But by the time we hit like 2010, 2012, it was really starting to get itself together. It was more credible. There were verification processes in action with some of the, top dating sites. And so in 2010, I had a couple of offers to sell It's Just Lunch. One was private equity, one was Match.com. And I went with private equity. And the whole reason was like, I still loved what I was doing, but, I was like managing a company, that had 700 employees. Like I didn't have that direct contact with clients anymore,
Right.
which was the whole reason I got in to begin with. That was the fun part. Now I'm like in board meetings and stuff like that. And that's like pretty boring, and at least for me. And so I saw the writing on the wall too when I decided to sell, because online was getting its act together, and people like our people, people in their 40s and 50s, they had no idea what to do with it because, maybe they got married in their 20s, maybe they got married at 25, and they never thought, oh, wow, when I'm 50, can't wait to do this all over again and walk down the aisle or, try to meet people. So, they're kind of like behind tech, where I've got 3 kids in their 20s. Like, they're like, oh yeah, mom, I'm on Bumble and Hinge and Raya. They're like, oh yeah, it's fun. Where, there's much more hesitancy with the 50 and 60 something crowd, where they don't understand the tech. And then you introduce what's been, a hot topic for 2 years, which is AI, which I absolutely love. Yes, we're giving up some privacy, with online dating and AI, but I think we're gaining so much more, because you might live in a bedroom community in the middle of nowhere and you think like, oh my gosh, everyone is married. Guess what? They're not. But you would have never had access to these people if it was 1990.
Right. So maybe along those thoughts or that topic of online dating, and you mentioned how, people who are now in their 50s and 60s, maybe they're a little more hesitant because it's a lot different than when the first time they did this. So what's your advice for someone in their 50s or 60s trying out dating apps for the first time?
Okay, it's like you're trying golf for the first time, or pickleball. A pickleball, take a clinic, golf, take a lesson, like get some help first, because the number one mistake people make is picking the dating app. They have no idea what to pick. If you go online and say, I'm 55, what app should I go on? They'll give you a list, but it's AI generated now. They don't really know. Might work in Ontario is not what's going to work in New York City.
Sure.
So, it's very different with the demographics. So I would say, first of all, get a little help. The second thing is so that you're on the right site, because if you're on the wrong site, you will quit within the first 2 weeks, and you'll just be like, oh, I give up. This does not work. It does not work. So, a dating coach like me, really, really comes in handy. Or my book just came out in January, Second Acts, Winning Strategies
Awesome.
for Dating Over 50. And that really, I think, what I like about the book, it's not like BS and it's not like psychobabble and stuff like that. I mean, I'm not a psychologist. I'm just very common sense, business oriented, strategy driven. And the whole book is about like how to get back in with your, with second acts. So it has like 15 different worksheets and QR codes where I take you through coaching on each one of these worksheets. And the first one starts out with, where's your head? Where's your mindset? And if your mindset is still in, oh my gosh, I hate him. He, took me for a lot of money. The custody battle was awful. You're not ready to date, because if you can't go on a date without talking about your ex, you're not ready yet. Like you have
Sure.
to kind of go a little more, through the process.
Makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And then the other thing is, I teach branding, because when you're online, you're a brand, and you might not realize it, you're on LinkedIn, you're on, Instagram, you're on Facebook, you're building a brand. You might not think about it that way, but online dating is the same thing. So I have a whole worksheet on, what's my brand? What makes me unique? What makes me, stand out from others? And then the very last worksheet, where people roll their eyes at me and they're like, what? And it's a worksheet that's basically a business plan for your love life. But, so it's a personal plan for your love life.
Okay.
Who's your competition? What are the barriers to entry? What should I be looking for? What's my demographic? All those types of things. Because you've got to have a strategy or, you're done. And you have to also understand this whole deal is a numbers game. It is a numbers game. And those people that can have perseverance and patience and can do this for 3 months, those are the ones that score. Those are the ones that, end up meeting somebody.
Okay. A lot more going into it than I would have expected. But I mean, it makes sense because just like any other business, I guess there is competition and knowing where to be, right?
Right.
Awesome. So switching gears a little bit, could you talk maybe a little bit about the difference between even how to prioritize like companionship over traditional marriage? So how do you see clients navigating these choices, especially when it comes to like cohabitation, keeping your financial independence, protecting legal interests, or things like that?
Yes, that's a very interesting question, and it's a very important one too. And I go through a couple chapters in my book about that. And that's everything from introducing children or family, to another person, to, financial separation. Now, what's interesting about this too is if we kind of break down the segments, the 50-something age group, a lot of times they'll be saying, yes, I want to get remarried. Now, when you hit the 60-something age group, most of the time, they're not really looking for marriage. They're looking for a long-term companionship, a long-term relationship, a monogamous relationship, and keeping finances separate. And I also find, too, that some of my clients, what they've done is while they're divorced, they say, they're really not. They're separated because they've gotten financial advice. Don't divorce until, one of you wants to get remarried or get into a long-term relationship because in terms of, taxes and assets, you're better off, keeping it status quo. Okay. So, but, that's, again, not the majority of people. So, okay, if you decide to marry somebody, there's the forensic accounting. What's mine, what's going to be yours, what's going to be ours. And that's where, you want to talk to an attorney before, you do something like that, especially if one of you has significantly more assets than the other. I tend to see most people on pretty close to being on par with each other. But that's an important question. Talking about finances ahead of time, talking about how things are going to be split. If you do get married, where are you living? Whose house are you living in? How does that whole thing work? You want to safeguard your retirement, savings and your 401ks and whatever else you might have, your stocks, and be careful with that. So I would say both getting advice from, an attorney and your accountant, whoever prepares your taxes and things is a really, really good way to go. At this point, especially the 60-something crowd, they really don't want to mix assets.
Yeah.
They want to have some that are together just for, day-to-day living, but then they want the rest separate. Okay. So it's, you don't want to jump in and just go in without, a prenup, or not necessarily even a prenup, but advice from somebody who knows what they're talking about.
Sure. And do you have any tips or advice for someone who maybe wants to have that conversation, but they don't really know how to approach it without offending their partner?
Well, you're not going to have this on the first or second or third date,
sure.
Right? No. I mean, those early dates are just to see their information gathering. Like, do I like her? Do I like him? Do I want to go on a second date, third date, fourth date? This is one of the things I really recommend. Take a trip together for a week because you'll really see, and I'll answer your question in a sec, you'll really see how people behave when you're on a trip and you're out of, your day-to-day living, and how people spend money and how people, treat travel and the type of hotels they want to stay in and the type of, they want to fly, first class or business class or, economy. You'll learn a lot about them. So I would say, once you decide that this relationship is going to be monogamous, or you're even more so what I think tends to happen is people tend to move in with each other. So not getting married, but, living together. So at that point in time, when you're talking about living together, that's the right time, or your exclusivity. That's the time to talk about money. And you can bring it up in just like, a really easy way, like, Joe, I'm really excited. We're making plans, for the future. But I think we probably should talk a little bit about, finances and see if we've got kind of the same, somebody might be a big spender, somebody might be a big saver. So you want to have that conversation. I had a client recently and they did get married. And before they got married, she did, an Excel spreadsheet. He did an Excel spreadsheet. And, they sat down together. I mean, they were very organized. I mean, this is your finances. This is what you're going to live on for the next, this isn't our grandparents' era. If we're 50 or 60, we have another good 20 or 30 years to live, right? So you want to make sure you're protected. So I think, by sharing and being open, about spending habits and, who's paying for what. And then if there is, a real difference in terms of, assets, then there's probably going to be some compromise if this relationship is really serious, somebody who has substantially, more assets than the other person. And that happens too. But you want to talk about it because you want to know what to expect. Then the other factor you have too is children. So what happens, and this is why sometimes kids are really against, the marriages. And I've seen a couple of people that were like great couples break up over kids that were like so negative about their parents or parent getting into a relationship because they thought it was going to hurt their inheritance. So I think the other thing is to be really open with your children. I know my mother passed away and then my dad remarried, and there's 6 kids in our family. And my dad was really open. And once a year, he would send, send us all a spreadsheet of assets. And it was going to be divided 6 ways equally between the children, with this amount of a lump sum going to his, current wife. And, so it was nothing unexpected that was going to happen where all of a sudden the wife has claim to all the money and, you've got kids that are upset. So I think the more honest and forthcoming you are about it with family members is better.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, actually. Just the kind of blended families, like when there's children from a previous relationship and it does get serious, then it's just so important to have those or do that estate planning, get everybody in the family on the same page, making sure you're considering what happens, because without proper planning, then someone's probably getting disinherited. But with proper planning, you can take care of all that. And you could, like you said, be transparent, be open so everybody knows what to expect.
Right, exactly. And then there's no hard feelings, and, everyone can live happily after that. So yeah, that conversation, can be tough for some people. I had a client maybe 3 or 4 months ago. They decided to move in together, not get married. And she was a teacher her entire life. He was like a hedge fund manager. So he had, his assets were astronomical. Hers were, very, very steady. And they worked out, a different kind of plan. Because was it split 50-50? No. Because, her earning power or what she was getting in, I don't know, a pension or whatever you call it,
Yeah.
Wasn't on par with his. And he ended up, paying for the home they lived in, but the home was going to be left to his children. And at the same time, any trips they were taking and things like that, he was going to pay for. And, there was no hard feelings about the whole thing. It was just, like you said, it's a transparency up front. You don't want to get in the situation where you're married or you're already living together. And then there's arguments about money, because as you know, with, this kind of a podcast, number one thing that people break up over are, financial arguments and disagreements.
Yeah, for sure. And then I'm not sure if this is a question for you or more of a question for a couples therapist, but I'll ask it anyway. Just along the money lines, it's very often, I mean, we see people all the time in a couple who, approach money differently or are more involved or, whatever the scenario is. So you talked about the importance of being open and planning things like that. But when you see two people who approach money differently, maybe one's a spender, one's a saver, do you have any tips or strategies as far as like, getting on the same page for spending on the, like, whether it's the day to day or the bigger ticket items?
Yes, I do. I've had some clients that when it was a big ticket item, and I'm not talking about, I don't know, a $400 shirt or a dress or something like that. I'm talking about a $25,000 piece of art that's going to hang in somebody's house. There's got in their house, they put caps on. If we're both going to look at something and share something, we have to agree on it if it's over X amount of dollars. Otherwise, do what you want with your money. But, if it's going to affect the other party in any way, there should be like a cap. Somebody, who isn't on par, like, let's go back to my example, the teacher in the hedge fund. If she all of a sudden, she wants a Porsche Cayenne and she's not thinking she's paying for it. You have that talk, up front, like, okay, you're going to kind of take care of your own finances and things like that. And I'm going to pay for these types of things. But it's very different if something like that is gifted versus, expected.
Sure.
Nobody wants a gold digger. And the same thing, you hear that, I kind of hate this phrase, but it's corny. It's like the nurse with the purse, a 50-year-old woman marrying a wealthy 75-year-old man and expecting to be taken care of. As long as there's boundaries in place and, expectations, I think that's good. And sometimes what happens in those cases too is it's more of, if there's real disparity in incomes, then what they'll do is some sort of an allowance,
Sure.
to the other person, so that, they might have one joint credit card and then the rest is, all separate.
Okay. A lot to unpack there.
Yes. A lot to think about when, compared to when we were 25 and had very little assets to, now we're 55 or 60 and we've got a lot, right?
Oh, for sure. Absolutely. Can you talk about maybe some of the benefits? So obviously there's, someone to spend time with in retirement and things like that, but what are some of the other benefits, whether emotional or physical, for having companionship or a partner throughout retirement?
Okay. So I think it is paramount that you have a partner as you go forward in life, whether, you've been through a divorce or you've just been single your whole life or you're widowed, because there's some longevity studies that, I really follow. And once the University of Michigan does a really good job with a study. And what they have found is that, yeah, a Mediterranean diet helps with longevity. 10K steps a day helps with, longevity. We know all that stuff, right?
Sure.
Sleep, blah, blah, blah. Number one thing that matters, though, is companionship. And that doesn't mean friends, though a community is very important around you, to have, friends around you and a tight knit, whether it's friends or family or the family of your own making. Having that romantic partner in your life, it shows that people live significantly longer and healthier when that is in their life. So yeah, it's super important to your longevity. I have people call me and they'll say, I'm probably too old for this, Andrea. I'm 60. I'm like, 60? You got to be kidding me. You got another good 20, maybe 30 years, You're ready for your second act. Like, let's go. It's going to be different than the first time around. It's going to be different than all those hormones that are raging wildly in, your 20s. But guess what? People in their 60s still have sex, and they still like it. And, just that everyday thing, somebody to celebrate holidays with, somebody to sleep with at night, to snuggle through, a Netflix film, to, travel with, that's a big thing people do in retirement. And, while you can see the growth of, solo traveling with groups, it's anyone who has done that as my clients. And sometimes they're doing really high end trips. They're all like, it's all women. it'd be so nice if I had, a romantic partner that I was sharing this with.
Sure. Yeah. And it's interesting how plans change. Like I could think of specific clients that we worked with who had these big goals, travel plans, and then spouse passes away and then they kind of retreat a little bit. And I'm also seeing the other side of that with a couple clients too, where they kind of put things on hold for like 5 years, but they've grieved, they're coming back out of their shell and all of a sudden dating again. And there's like a new energy. All of a sudden they're spending money again because we've been saying, you've been saving your whole life, like go spend this money, go have fun. But anyway, just having that companionship is getting them back out of the shell, getting them doing the things that they previously wanted to do, but just, whether they feel guilty or whatever it is, they hadn't been able to. So we're starting to see that again. It's exciting just to see, how their energy and personality, like everything's kind of a little more upbeat, which is great.
Right. I think a lot of energy comes back.
Yeah.
And that's one thing people have to be careful about in retirement, because when you look at the statistics on retirement too, here is a vibrant man who had, a successful career, was a go-getter and, really enjoyed his career. And then all of a sudden one day, stop, I'm retired. What do I do? Okay, I'm playing golf. The same energy isn't there. So to be involved with other people and being involved, with a new woman or a new man in your life, you're going to find new interests too. Because you're not going to share, the same interests you had with your previous spouse. You're going to be learning new things. The curiosity is part of what keeps us, human and alive and, excited. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. We've had a couple episodes recently where we're just talking about ageism and why we don't want to think of that as a bad thing. And it's still just living. And to your point, I mean, there's so many years to live in retirement. So many people are retiring in their 50s or even 60s. There's still another 20, 30 for some people, even 40 years left, right? So there's so much time. You don't want to hold back or not make the most of life because you feel like it's too late for you.
Right. Exactly. And you know what? I would say, like, if you're on the fence about dating, where you're at that age and you lost somebody or you had a divorce or whatever, if you're on the fence about it and you're nervous, but, you're a little bit excited, you're ready. You're ready. So, that's why anyone who calls me, I spend like 15 minutes on the phone with them first and talk to them and make sure, like, I think they're ready too. And sometimes people, they've been going through therapy too because of a tough divorce or, being widowed or something. And one of the questions I always ask too is, does your therapist know you're calling me? And I'll get one of two answers. One will be, oh yeah, and she thinks it's a great idea, or yes, and she thinks it's way too soon. So you know what? I kind of go with the therapist. So if the therapist is like, go for it, I'm like, great. If the therapist is like, you're not ready, I'm always like, something? I think you should listen to your therapist. And I've been doing this for over 30 years. I will be here in a month, a year, 2 years. So you can, come back to me when you've gone through the process of, grieving or loss or, whatever it might be, whatever you're working through.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So are there any, or do you have like a favorite success story or two that you can share with us of people who are like maybe into their 60s and started dating again?
Oh yeah, I've got a lot of them. Like
sure.
when at the gate is like, I'm looking across my office right now and I've got a bulletin board and it's still full of Christmas cards from people. And some people that I had like 2 years ago, I didn't even know they ended up getting married because I lose track of them once they meet somebody. And I had this one woman and she was tough. She was from New York City. She relocated to the West Coast to help her mother, who was in, her older years, and be with her. And she didn't know anyone out there. And the only thing she was into was sailing. And one day I'm online working for another client, like looking for dates for them. And I come across this man and I'm like, oh my gosh, all this guy talks about is sailing and they're the same age. And so even though my client that I'm talking about, her name is JP, that her membership was over, I called her and I said, I have got the guy for you. I've got the guy for you. And then I got this like 6-fold Christmas card with them like sailing and doing all these things together that, they would have never they would have never met otherwise if it wasn't for, online dating. And me just happened to notice, remembering she was all about, that was her thing. And then I had a widow in January who ended up getting remarried, and he was absolutely adorable. But he swore to me when he started with me, he was never going to get married again. His wife was the love of his life. And he called me and he said, guess what? I think I'm going to pop the question. And I go, oh, what? I said, what happened to never getting married again? He goes, well, I found the second love of my life. And I'm like, see, it happens. It happens. Love can, hit you more than once. So, anyone who says there's only one person out there for me, or, there's only one soulmate in the world, I'm like, oh, get real. There's other people out there that, will fit with you at this phase in your life that very well may not have fit, 20, 25 years ago. My husband, he's asked me before, I was married for 24 years. I'm divorced, and I didn't date for like 4 years because the kids were like in their teens and I didn't want to like mess them up. And he said to me before, do you think if we would have met like in our 20s, we would have gotten married? And I said, no way. No way. I was just on like such a different page, what I was looking for. And I was like really into my career. But now, it's like, it works. It's just like the perfect person for this time in my life.
Sure. Yeah,
So
no, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure you have lots of stories of that exact thing. Now, one of the things that, if someone say they're ready to get back, they're in their 60s, maybe they're widowed, they get back out there, but they have a couple of bad experiences. How would you coach someone through that to say, it's worth it to stick with it to find that person?
If I could sell thick skin, I'd be a billionaire, because, it's like rejection is tough. And with online dating, yes, you are going to have rejection. For every 5 messages you send, only one person is going to respond back to you. So in the beginning, I think you can feel like you take that so personally. And that's why they have me as a coach, because they have me for accountability. They have me for my knowledge, but they also have me, I guess, as a cheerleader, keeping their spirits up during it. I've had somebody who's gone on 18 dates and then she met the one, and she was like just ready to throw the towel in. And every week on the phone, like with her, I would see her name, in my Google Calendar, and I'd be like, oh no. And then she met him. So you've got to keep going. And I think it helps if you have somebody that you're accountable to and that you're working with and that you're on the right track. Also, the other thing that will really, really hurt you with online dating is talking to family and friends. They are the worst naysayers in the world, because your married friends will be like, oh, you should want to meet somebody organically. You're so pretty. And, I say to my clients, look, I'm going to be really direct with you, graciously direct, but I'm going to be direct because I want you to meet somebody. And so I'm not going to say stuff like that to you, even if they are, pretty or handsome or whatever. I want this to work. The same thing, like when don't talk to your single friends about this, because your single friends are obviously single for a reason. And if they want a relationship and they're not in one, it's their fault. Sorry, it's their fault. Like they are doing something wrong. So to hang out with, single guy friends or single girlfriends, and the guys will be like, oh, all the good women are married. And the women will be like, all the good men are taken. And I'm like, so not true. So not true. So you've got to get over that, that whole hump of, negativity is like a virus. So you've got to stay positive. And yes, it can be hard sometimes, but I'm like perseverance, patience, the first 3 months, that's going to be the key. If you can do this for 3 months, can I guarantee it? No, but the odds are so in your favor that you're going to meet somebody. With the millions of people that are online, even people in small rural towns, they'll meet somebody.
Yeah. Well, that's good. That's good for boosting the confidence a little bit for anyone listening who's had a tough time. Tell us a little bit. You mentioned your new book, Second Act. So give us our listeners a bit of a sneak peek in what they can expect and where they can find it.
Okay. Well, it's right here. Right here.
Perfect.
Well, I'll just see. So it's got Second Acts, Winning Strategies for Dating Over 50, and it's got 166 strategies in it. They're hard strategies. They're not like go to the gym or go to the driving range. They're really things that you can actively do to meet people. And like I said, those worksheets will take you from A to Z, and you won't even have to hire me or a dating coach unless you want to, for the accountability part, because this really takes you all the way from writing a great profile to having fantastic pictures. And by that, I don't mean fake pictures or touched up edited photos. I don't mean your LinkedIn photo. I mean, photos of you doing you and what you're interested in, whether it's, tennis or hiking or whatever it might be, really good action photos. And then the next thing I go through in the book, and I talk a lot about this, and this goes to women, and it's the number one point that men get very irritated with. So they'll be online and a woman will see them and she'll send him a heart or a like or a wink. And that's it, no message. So basically she just kicked the ball into this poor guy's court, and now he's responsible for everything. So I get pushback, especially from my women in their 60s. They'll be like, no, I should be pursued. And I'm like, no, that we're not in the 1950s. No, you should not be pursued. You should be, men find self-confidence sexy, and that you're reaching out to them first, and you reach out with a unique message. And I talk about a lot of different kinds of unique messages, not hey, how's your weekend? Or hey, how's your Monday? Those are so boring. That's it's like saying nothing. So, reading over their profile and pinpointing something that's, really interesting, and saying something kind of quirky. And by quirky, I don't mean weird, but quirky, unique, so you stand out. And then stop messing around with all these texts back and forth. You could text me, I could text you, you could text me, I could text you. We're done. That's 4 times. By then, we should be setting up the date and getting together, for lunch or, drinks later in the day. And not dinner, don't put pressure on it. And don't do coffee. Coffee is a total cop-out. It's
Okay.
You can show up in your Lululemons for, a coffee date. Is that romantic? I think not, Now, showing up, saying for a first date, oh, let's grab a coffee and take the coffee and, do a little hike in a safe venue, of course. That's a good date because you're walking and talking and you're doing something. That can be a good date. But I'll have people who, when I talk to them on their weekly coaching calls, they'll say, I'll say, okay, catch me up. What's going on? And they'll be like, oh my gosh, I talked to John, it's going great with John. I'm like, oh, where'd you guys go? Oh, we didn't go anywhere. We talked on the phone. And I go, oh, for when? Oh, 3 nights last week. We talked on the phone for over an hour. And here's this guy who lives 10 minutes from you, and you couldn't get dressed and go meet him for a drink. So, I like to tell people the problem with those phone calls and all this texting back and forth is that your expectations, you're flirting, right? You're flirting with the texts or you're flirting with the phone calls. Your expectations are going up, up, up. And when you go on these dates, I don't want high expectations. I don't want low expectations either, because then it's negative. And I've had women say before they'd gone on the first date with a guy, Andrea, I know this is the one. I've told 3 of my girlfriends about him because we've talked and had these great conversations. I think, he's going to be it. And then, of course, the bubbles bursted, right? It bursts on the date. So go into every date with no expectations, nothing. And that's not bad. That's just realistic.
See where it goes.
Yeah, see where it
But
goes.
at least get in person.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So if someone's listening today, they're over 50, maybe divorced, maybe widowed, and they're hesitant to jump into dating, what's one piece of advice you'd offer to get them moving?
I would say you've got to dive in with both feet. It can't be like dangling a toe in the water. So, okay, here's the first thing I would do. I would go to my website. It's 33,000dates.com, 33000dates.com. And I'll tell you why. Take my dating quiz that's on there. It's free. And what it's going to do, it's like 14 questions. And it's going to give you a score of how you stack up to people who have been very successful with online dating and have met somebody. And you'll right away know, hey, I'm ready, or, ooh, boy, I didn't score so well. I might have to do a little work on, a couple of these things. So so that's one thing you could do. The second thing you could do is you can schedule a 15-minute free call with me. And that's really a screening call. I'm going to ask you some questions and kind of determine, yes, you're ready, or, tell you you're not, and then the other thing is, buy the book. I mean, the book's way cheaper than me. The book's like $30. So, and that can get you back in the mindset. But, it's something to keep in mind. There's no perfect time to start dating. It's, people will be like, summer better? Is winter better? Are the holidays better? Like, no, there's no good time. It's like, when you're getting pregnant, is there a good time to get pregnant? No. Is there a good time to take a trip that's perfect? No. It's just kind of like now, because every day you're a day older. Every birthday you're a year older. So, what's holding you back? You have to go for it.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good place to leave it. Just go for it. I think anything uncomfortable that we know we want to or should do, it's easy to find excuses of why we should wait, right? So you just got to do it.
Right. So get out of the complaining mode and do something, proactive.
Awesome. That's great. Thanks so much, Andrea. For all our listeners, so 33,000dates.com. Second Acts is the book, but we'll have that in the show notes as well. Retirementplansimplified.ca. Just click on the blog tab and find the episode. You'll get all the resources there. So thank you again, Andrea, so much for joining us today. And for anyone who, I guess, if you know someone looking to get back into the dating world, make sure you share this episode so people can get some great insights on re-entering the dating world and hear from Andrea and see her resources. So Andrea, thanks again for joining us today.
Thanks, Jeff.